Thanks very much, and maybe I can add my word of welcome to you, to EMA, to the new building, and going into the third year of operation of the legislation. So it's my pleasure to give a little bit of a school report, I think, and then maybe to set the scene for the following presentations from June Rain, very much focusing on the public health aspects of the PRAC work, looking at capacity building for the operation of the legislation from Paul Barrow, and then Frank Diafuca trying to give a perspective of how different initiatives that are ongoing in Europe fit together with the overall plan for public health promotion and protection. So I think I'm in control here, I think. Yeah, here we go. So what I'd like to do is just to start with the conclusion, if you like, with the key messages. Just a couple of reminder slides to set the scene, to really then very rapidly whiz through some of the key points that have been delivered over the last couple of years, particularly focusing on what's been delivered in the last year, and then to look forward to the coming years, but also to some extent to presentations coming during the rest of the program this afternoon, because very much my presentation can be seen as a scene setter, with more details coming in subsequent presentations. This is the slide that I also conclude with, and I would like you to think of these as key messages. So in terms of the 2 years of operation, what has been delivered so far? We believe we've delivered proactive planning of studies and risk minimization with risk management plans for all new marketing authorization applications. We have delivered particularly the member states and the industry in terms of collecting patient reports of suspected adverse drug reactions with a significant increase. We have signals, drug safety signals, new or changing safety issues managed through the PRAC at an unprecedented level to deliver faster labelling changes for the interests of patients and healthcare professionals. We have benefit risk assessment delivered through referrals and periodic safety update reports. We have dramatically increased transparency, and we have EU coordination of safety messages. What we're now focusing on is continued delivery for public health, so continuing to maintain and enhance the 2 years of delivery that have already been happening, but also to focus on process improvement to increase both our efficiency and effectiveness. And that process improvement will come out in various presentations during the course of this afternoon, and hopefully also in some of the discussion. But that process improvement will be based on the experience, be it based on feedback from industry on a template or a guideline, based on better scientific methods, and we have presentations later on some of the regulatory science projects and how they will be assessed in terms of their impact on business processes, based on delivering IT systems. Again, we have a presentation on that later, and particularly the business change linked to those IT systems. We're also going to be focusing on enhanced stakeholder engagement, and obviously today is very important in that context, as well as starting to look at how we can demonstrate impact. And I note that there's a big meeting in Brussels later this week where academics and industry colleagues who have been doing certain research projects on the impact of the pharmacovigilance legislation, as well as other regulatory legislation, will be presenting their results. So I'm not going to go through this slide point by point, but it's the slide you've seen at every one of the 8 stakeholder workshops to remind us of the objectives of the legislation: promote and protect public health by reducing the burden of adverse drug reactions and optimizing the use of medicines. Clear roles and responsibilities, science-based and risk proportionate, increased proactivity, reduced duplication, integrated benefit risk, robust decision-making, strengthened EU network, engaged patients and healthcare professionals, increased transparency, better information on medicines. I also want to remind you, as a scene setter, of the constraints. This legislation was adopted in the middle of a financial crisis globally, and there have been significant resource constraints across the different stakeholder groups for the implementation. So we've had to implement lean and hopefully smart. We also are implementing the biggest change in the regulatory framework for a generation, not just in pharmacovigilance, but right across medicines regulation. So it's been no mean feat. And I think it's also relevant to say that this impacts on patients, on healthcare professionals, on industry, on regulators, on different stakeholder groups, increasing the complexity of implementation. Because of that, we use prioritization criteria, and again, you've seen these before, but it's highly relevant to the key message of today, which is really that in terms of the public health activities, these are fully operational and being delivered. The transparency and communication activities, which were the second priority, are operational and being delivered. And the simplification activities, particularly based on IT systems to simplify, for example, reporting by the industry, are now key focus and will be delivered over the years to come. So just by way of summary of what's been delivered in 2013 and 14, just a few things that don't otherwise often get mentioned. Pharmacovigilance Risk Assessment Committee has been in full operation now for 2 years. The new business processes, and it depends how you count and whether you categorize things as processes or sub-processes, but we've got approximately 50 business processes that come out of the new legislation. And that's been a major undertaking, both in terms of setting them up, but now running them. There have been audits of the national competent authorities' pharmacovigilance systems and audits of the European Medicines Agency's pharmacovigilance systems. I say that partly to reassure the industry that you're not the only ones that go through audit and inspection. We, based on the new legislation, do also, and all of the organisations within the network have done so. We have more and better guidance coming out over the last couple of years, and we have process improvements already being delivered. I'm not going to go through this in detail, but this is the sort of slide that's useful to take home with you, if you like. It's what in one slide, the good pharmacovigilance practice modules that have been published and those that will be published or updated in the next year. It's more digestible if you look at this slide, and it's basically saying what to look out for in the future. So in terms of revisions to existing good pharmacovigilance practice modules, we will be going out to consultation on revisions of risk management systems, management and reporting of adverse reactions to medicinal products. I should emphasize that we have published today the first revision, and so if you look on the web, you will see the first revision of the ADR reporting guidance. Today's update relates to the reporting from post-authorization safety studies, following very clear feedback from stakeholders about the need for proportionality and a focused approach, which gives scope in the protocol of a post-authorization safety study to have some control over the way suspected adverse reactions are reported. What you will find in 2015 is a further update, which particularly leads to moving to the new format, the new ICH format, but also dealing with other aspects of feedback that we've received, particularly from the industry, about some of the operational challenges of ADR reporting globally. We'll also be consulting on an updated post-authorization safety studies module, signal management module, and there will also be ongoing updates to the methodological guidance that comes out of NCEP that particularly focuses on epidemiology. In terms of new modules, we will be aiming in early 2015 to go out for public consultation on a guideline on continuous pharmacovigilance, which is going to be really quite an important new module, which brings other modules together and acts as the thread between them. It both takes a life cycle look at pharmacovigilance, looking at a product going from authorization through its life, but also looks at integrating different processes and filling gaps. So we think that'll be a really important one for stakeholders to look at when it comes out, hopefully in the new year. We also have various modules under development looking at specific either product types or populations, so biologicals, pregnancy, and geriatrics. We have good practice guides being drafted on medication errors as part of the work program adopted by the heads of medicines agencies on medication errors, a good practice guide on educational materials, and featuring later on the agenda, scientific guidance on efficacy studies. I just want to go very, very quickly, and it's a sort of flash a slide and remember a number kind of speed of presentation, but it's some of the business processes that are core to delivering pharmacovigilance, just to give you some idea of volumes, activities, and delivery. So in terms of risk management plans, this slide gives you, in the first column of numbers, the first year of operation of the PRAC, and in the second column of numbers, the second year. And you can see relatively steady and high volumes. So per year, well over 300 per year risk management plans, either with initial applications or follow-ups. This is the evidence of activity that delivers on this point about proactivity. proactively planning studies and proactively planning risk minimization for medicinal products. This is the reality, the day-to-day work of the PRAC rapporteurs and the PRAC and the assessors in the member states. In terms of periodic safety update reports, so these are the big benefit risk assessments for authorized medicines, which are routine and planned. You can see volumes have been pretty steady since December 2012 when the first PSURs came to the PRAC, and we're running at about 30, 40, 50 PSURs per meeting. And you'll see that about 20% of those PSURs result in some kind of labeling change or regulatory action. So high volumes of activity leading directly to labeling changes for fast product information updates for patients and healthcare professionals. I think in the interest of time, I won't run through this slide in detail, but we've had a number of observations from the new PSUR procedures, both in terms of their content, but also in terms of how to optimize the submissions from industry, the assessment from the member states, and so on. And you'll be aware that we will start the single assessment procedure for substances that are only in nationally authorized products, with the first procedure starting in January. And that will be a really, really important operational final bit of the jigsaw puzzle in terms of the new legislation coming in, and will lead to the phasing out at the end of this year of the so-called work sharing that has been done under the auspices of the heads of medicines agencies very successfully for the last 5+ years. Maybe just also to highlight that in the reorganization within the agency, a dedicated PSUR procedure team is in place, and there's an email address on that last bullet point for queries about procedure, if anybody would like to get more information. Thought you'd be interested in post-authorization safety studies. This slide shows in each column imposed protocols versus non-imposed protocols. Then in the third column, results from imposed studies, and then results from non-imposed studies. The imposed, non-imposed, for those that aren't familiar, is whether the regulators are imposing it as a legal obligation to do the study on the company. It has procedural implications and enforcement implications. And you can see a mixture of both imposed and not imposed. So not imposed is where the company is doing the study voluntarily. And really quite high volumes going through the committees, and particularly through the PRAC. And the first results also coming to the committee, which potentially lead to labelling changes or changes in the risk management plans. So high volumes of activities on post-authorization studies. We're also very pleased to see a big uptake in terms of registration, public registration of study protocols and results by the industry. And so you can see we now have 345 up to August 2014 study protocols registered in the EU Post-Authorization Studies Register, which is really good in terms of transparency, in terms of sharing expertise, in terms of different stakeholders knowing what research is ongoing within the EU. And we would encourage all companies that haven't fully registered their studies to do so, both imposed and non-imposed, going forward. We have a dedicated presentation on post-authorization efficacy studies later in the program, but just to say that the legal tools are now in place and the scientific guidance is actively being drafted and will be going out to public consultation later. So wait, please, for the full presentation on that for details. I thought you'd be interested in spontaneous reporting in the European Economic Area. So this is EU reporting for both patients and from patients and healthcare professionals. You can slice these data in different ways, and what we've tried to do here is to slice them to be the most representative as to whether the new legislation has led to more reporting. So by doing so, this is before the different case reports have been merged. So if we got a case report from a patient and the same topic being reported by that patient's doctor, this is counted twice because it's the number of times the act of reporting has taken place. I know that's a point of detail, but I think it might preempt some questions coming up later. So you'll see that reporting has gone up really significantly since the legislation. So green bar is the year up to July 2012. Then 2012-2013 is the light blue, and the dark blue is the year ending July 2014. Also encouraging is that that's reflected in the patient reporting. So we highlighted last year the big jump in numbers of patient reports. This year, it's not a big jump, it's a slow increase building on the success of the first year, but it's really encouraging to see that that wasn't just a blip, it seems to be maintained. And I think one of the messages, certainly from my perspective, would be, in terms of patient reporting, really good start, but a long way still to go to build on the success of the first couple of years. Just to emphasize, because this is really back office work that doesn't often get highlighted, but there's a huge amount of work going on within the network to manage the data that comes in through spontaneous reporting. Goes on at member state level, and this slide highlights some of the stuff that goes on with the Eutrovigilance database. Just gives you an idea of the volumes. 84,000 substance terms within the report recoded. It's a technical term, but it means we've been making changes to the database to make it more searchable by substance and products. Detecting duplicate reports and merging them into a master. 85,000 cases removed from the system. And then doing quality assessments of the cases sent in so that we can provide feedback to the National Competent Authority, to the individual pharmaceutical company. 136 assessments performed and feedback provided. So really important sort of background work that doesn't often see the light of day, but it really all drives up the quality of the reports for searching and therefore for signal detection and evaluation. June Rain, in her presentation, is going to go into the signals in a little bit more detail. So I'll just flag up 163 signals managed by the PRAC in its first 2 years. That's about 10 signals per month. And the vast majority of them lead to labelling changes. So informing patients and healthcare professionals how to optimise the safe and effective use of medicines, a really important highlight of the legislation. I'm going to skip the next two slides because I think they come out in June Rain's presentation. Maybe just to mention additional monitoring. This is for certain products, identifying them by an inverted black triangle. That was based on the recommendations of the Patient and Consumers Working Party. And then that symbol encouraging healthcare professionals and patients to report all suspected adverse drug reactions. Just to emphasize that there are currently 1,459 products on that list. And you'll see it's been increasing steadily over time. And I thought you'd be interested in this slide. 1,308 of those products are on the list because there's a post-authorization safety study imposed as a condition of the marketing authorization, and 82 of them are products containing a new active substance. And then you can see the numbers fall off behind that. So that just gives an idea. I think that some people have thought it would all be about new products, but in fact, a lot of it is about products that have got studies imposed on them. June Rain again will go into the referrals in a bit of detail and give you some examples and some of the content and the public health implications. But just to emphasize that we're talking about steady volumes, I would say. This is a similar sorts of levels of referrals to under the old legal framework, but what we have now is a clearer process, the involvement of the expert committee, which involves patients and healthcare professional representatives, etc. And as we reported last year, the mean time of referrals had gone down between the new legislation compared to the old. Particularly of interest to the industry, I think, just to emphasize that the body of guidance and rules and procedures for pharmacovigilance inspections is now complete and is just in sort of maintenance phase. So it's all there on the web should you want to know how a particular inspection would work, etc. for you. In terms of risk management plan summaries, I think it's fair to say that this is still work in progress, and we're in a pilot phase, and we currently, as of end of August, have 31 risk management plan summaries published on the EMA website. We're going to evaluate in 2015, getting feedback as to what's good, what's not so good about this, because there's been quite a lot of debate on what is the purpose and who should the audience be for a risk management plan summary. And the initial vision was that this was to support patients and healthcare professionals. I think most would agree that the first few that have been published are not very patient-friendly in terms of the way they're written, but might be very interesting, for example, to generic companies coming with a follow-up product to see what the innovator product has got in terms of risk management planning, for example. So let's look forward. That was looking to the last 2 years in terms of some of the key business processes. Looking forward, continued delivery for public health, process improvement to increase effectiveness and efficiency, enhanced stakeholder engagement, and demonstrating impact. Let's start with the process improvement. We have a dedicated presentation later on which looks at the IT system enhancements. So literature monitoring is in part about delivering some IT functionality, but it's also a service provided by the European Medicines Agency. Vigilance enhancements, the so-called Article 57 database. This is the database of substances and products to run the other systems to allow us to better identify medicines and products. Periodic safety update report repository, looking at risk management in terms of impact and effectiveness, transparency and communication, particularly the web portal, which is currently the European Medicines Agency's website is currently functioning as the web portal, but there are aspirations to have something much more useful to particularly patients and healthcare professionals. So I just want to emphasize, and this will come up in Frank Diafuca's presentation, that we are also supporting process improvement through scientific regulatory sciences research, and probably the highlights of that are the PROTECT project, which will be concluding in the spring of next year. And we will be organising a scientific regulatory sciences conference in February next year to look at the results of PROTECT and to see what their implications might be for regulatory practice. Some of you will be familiar with the ADVANCE project, which is about vaccine monitoring, and that's now nearly 12 months in, and that should be putting forward a blueprint for a framework for studying both the benefits and risks of vaccines in Europe. We also have a number of projects looking to drive up the evidence base supporting decisions. So there are certain studies that have been driven from EMA, and most of those are in that EU post-authorization studies registry that I mentioned earlier. We also have contributions from the NCEP network. We also have really important work coming in from the 7th Framework Programme, although that's 7th Framework Programme studies are starting now, most of them to conclude. I'm thinking of things like SOS on the non-steroidals, feeding into the diclofenac referral, and so on. Also, just to mention building capacity, and we have a dedicated presentation on the scope of joint action from Paul shortly, but that's going to be really important in terms of building capacity within the EU network for operating pharmacovigilance. And I mentioned NCEP in terms of delivering best evidence, but NCEP is also about building capacity to do studies, and that training aspect and sharing best practice within NCEP is a really important part of what it sets out to do. Now, I just introduced this slide because we have 3 interrelated initiatives, which you could argue are all fundamentally about the same thing, and that's about delivering data and information into decision-making on the public health aspects of pharmacovigilance, and then making sure that it delivers in terms of the impact of pharmacovigilance. So if you hear people referring to best evidence, that's really about driving up research to support decision-making. You'll also hear us talking about the impact of pharmacovigilance. That's looking both at data on whether ADR reporting has increased, data on whether we've avoided liver failure following restrictions to a particular medicine, but also looking at the resources used, satisfaction, engagement, these sort of less directly public health focused but really important aspects. And the final one, which is overlapping, is effectiveness of risk minimization, which is particularly highlighted in the legislation. But I think most of you can see how effectiveness of risk minimization overlaps a little bit with the impact of pharmacovigilance, and the way you deliver the effectiveness of risk minimization is probably by having really good best evidence. In terms of engaging stakeholders, just to emphasize the ongoing public consultation on public hearings, and we have a number of presentations later on this afternoon to emphasize both the public hearings but also the work being done with patients and healthcare professionals in terms of benefit risk. I've already preempted this slide slightly, but there's some really important work to be done in terms of measuring both the performance of pharmacovigilance, and some of these activity numbers, like the number of PSURs, the number of risk management plans, are about performance to some extent and activity. Whereas I think the holy grail really is to look at the impact. Are we making a difference in terms of reducing mortality, morbidity from adverse drug reactions? What has been the effect of the new legislation in terms of resources going to pharmacovigilance? and so on and so forth. And this slide shows us a way of approaching that, particularly in terms of impacts, looking at behavioural change on the one hand, so that might be prescribing, as well, rather than health outcomes on another. Have we actually looked at, I use the liver toxicity example again, where have we actually reduced the number of cases of severe liver toxicity, for example. This is really important because it allows us to improve our processes based on feedback. So it allows us to make them more effective and more efficient. It's important in terms of demonstrating added value. I mean, everybody in here is fully committed to public health and fully committed to pharmacovigilance. But sometimes, rightly, we are questioned as to whether the spend, for example, whether people should be spending money on pharmacovigilance rather than some other public health activity. And so it's really important that we can generate data to show the added value, the positive impact of pharmacovigilance. So that's justifying activities and spending. And it's highly likely that there will be reviews again of EU pharmacovigilance, and it therefore provides the data upon which we can conduct those reviews. So last two slides, conclusions. Pharmacovigilance legislation, building on 2 years of operation. We believe we've delivered proactive planning of studies and risk minimization, very much in collaboration with the network and stakeholders. That we collectively have increased patient reporting of adverse drug reactions, that signals are being managed through the PRAC, leading to much more rapid labelling changes for patients and healthcare professionals, that benefit risk assessments are being delivered month after month after month through referrals and periodic safety update reports, that we have a generational change, really, in terms of transparency in pharmacovigilance and decision-making, and important EU coordination of safety messages. And looking to the future, we're going to continue to focus on the public health mission. We're going to deliver process improvement to increase effectiveness and efficiency based on experience, scientific methods, and IT systems. We want to further enhance stakeholder engagement, and we want to start generating data that can demonstrate impact. So thank you very much indeed.